Ortensio Milano didn't do mornings. Not until 3 years ago, when he started showing up right at 7 a.m. sharp to a cracked window diner on the edge of downtown, far from the skyscrapers and silence-proofed penthouses his kind preferred. No entourage, no muscle, no gold watch or bulletproof glass. Just Ortensio, his black suit sharp as sin, seated across from a man most people thought was already halfway to the grave. The old man's name was Robert Strom. Late 60s. Wrinkled face. Fedora pulled low. A man who stirred his coffee like time was something he had more of than he knew what to do with. And Ortensio Milano, whose name made lieutenants flinch and prosecutors sweat, cut his toast. Every morning, he sliced it into 2 neat halves, spread the jam, topped off the coffee, and listened quietly to whatever story Robert felt like mumbling that day. Most of the diner's regulars assumed it was a guilt trip, a paid arrangement, or some low-profile charity move. The waitstaff made side bets on how long the ritual would last. Ortensio never explained, and Robert never asked for anything more. To anyone watching, it was just another oddity in a city full of them. But inside that quiet booth, something old and dangerous lived in silence. Something personal. Because years ago, in an alley halfway around the world, a 12-year-old boy had done something that no one, not even he, fully remembered. Something that kept a man like Robert Strom alive. Ortensio never knew the full story. Just that he owed the old man something big. And he didn't like debts. So, for 1,131 mornings, he paid it with toast and jam and silence. Until the 1,132nd morning, when Robert didn't show. The diner bell still rang. The coffee still sizzled. But booth 6 wasn't empty. Instead, 2 suited lawyers were waiting there. And behind them stood 4 stone-faced men in black, armed, clean-cut, and very much not from around here. That was the morning the city's most feared mob boss discovered the old man he'd been helping had been helping him back the entire time. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. Ortensio didn't move at first. The envelope just sat there between them, heavy as a loaded gun. The taller of the 2 lawyers, salt and pepper hair, long fingers, government demeanor, gave a respectful nod but didn't repeat himself. The name on his pocket square read, M. Rourke, Eldon and Locke. A boutique legal firm known to the kind of men who didn't ask for business cards. The shorter lawyer opened a leather folio and slid out a single sheet. Mr. Strom passed peacefully in his sleep, he said. There was no pain, no struggle. Just quiet. Ortensio's fingers curled around the sugar shaker. It didn't tremble, but it wanted to. The 4 bodyguards stood in a diamond formation behind the booth, not speaking, not blinking. They weren't Mafia muscle, he could tell by the cut of their suits and the way their eyes tracked exits. Not faces. Federal, maybe ex-military. Definitely not for show. Ortensio glanced past them to the front door, then the kitchen, then back to the envelope. The diner's clock ticked once, 7:01 a.m. He finally picked up the envelope, flipped it over and saw the seal, a single, etched S over a stylized compass rose. Not legal. Not corporate. Intelligence. Ortensio had spent enough years around enough shady corridors to know when something wasn't meant for normal eyes. What is this? He asked. And who the hell was he really? The taller lawyer gave a measured look. You'll want to open that in private, he said. And you'll want to do it soon. You have 72 hours from this moment to access a safety vault in Geneva. After that, per Mr. Strom's directive, the contents will be permanently liquidated. Ortensio raised a brow. Liquidated as in? As in erased, the man said. Wiped. Gone. For his instruction, nothing gets left behind unless it's in your hands. The silence that followed felt like 1,000 eyes pressing in from invisible corners. Rourke handed over a separate envelope, thinner, cream-colored. You'll find flight instructions inside, he added. Private jet. Airport code clearance. The rest is yours to figure out. He stepped back. The meeting was over and the city hadn't even finished its first coffee. Ortensio watched them go, the lawyers, the suits, the clean black car waiting outside. He didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, he sat, ordered toast, cut it himself. The knife dragged through the bread like it was tougher than it should have been. The table across from him was empty for the first time in 3 years. The waitress came over, confused. "Where's your friend today?" she asked softly. Ortensio didn't look up. "Gone," he said. Then added, more to himself, but not done. Back at his penthouse, Ortensio locked the door, disabled the security system, and shut the curtains. He set the sealed envelope on the granite counter like it might explode. The room was silent but heavy, like something had been waiting there with him, unseen, for a very long time. He poured a glass of whiskey, ignored the clock, and finally broke the seal. Inside were 3 things. The first was a brushed metal USB drive with a label printed in small serif font, the Palermo Protocol. The second was a slip of plastic, a Swiss bank card, matte black with a chrome chip and the number 716, XK. The third was a folded note, written in a surprisingly elegant hand. "Kindness is currency. Now cash in. RS." For the first time in years, Ortensio felt something unfamiliar slide under his skin. Uncertainty. Not fear. But close. The kind of breathless pause that comes before a gunfight or a miracle. He inserted the USB into a burner laptop and waited. No viruses. No traps. Just a folder named "Begin Here." Inside, dozens of documents, redacted transcripts, photo scans, and video files marked "Confidential, Eyes Only." He clicked the first one and froze. A surveillance photo. Dated 1998. Naples, Italy. A boy, him, barely 12, standing over a collapsed man in a dark alley, blood staining the stone. The man's face was blurry but unmistakable. It was Robert Strom. He clicked another file, this one a scan of a CIA field report. Operation code, Lantern. Status, failed. Assets, compromised. Agent R.J. Storm, presumed Kia. Ortensio dropped back in his chair, the whiskey glass untouched. It was the first time he realized just how long Robert had been watching him. A slow burn of memory returned, Robert's strange questions over coffee, the references to books Ortensio had never heard of, the way he'd always looked at exits, not people. The man hadn't been a retiree. He'd been a ghost. A man who'd faked his death once and had finally run out of time to do it again. Ortensio clicked a video file. It was grainy. Robert was speaking into a handheld recorder. "I've seen monsters in suits and saints in prison. But there's a third kind, the ones who can't quite be either, who walk the edge. Milano walks that edge. And the world will be better or worse because of what he chooses next." The screen went black. Ortensio leaned forward and breathed through his teeth. The Palermo Protocol wasn't about him. It was about what came after him. And Strom had just handed him the fuse. He flipped back to the other envelope, the one with the flight instructions. The bank was located in Geneva's private district, secured by biometric scan. The card and ID were pre-approved under a false name, Thomas Galanti. Strom had pre-cleared every step. Even in death, he was 10 steps ahead. Ortensio locked the USB in his gun safe, slid the bank card into a hidden pocket, and lit a cigarette. He didn't smoke often, but today he did. He let the nicotine burn until his heartbeat slowed. Then he picked up his phone and called Johnny, his oldest lieutenant. "Have the plane ready," he said. "We're going to Switzerland." "You in trouble?" Johnny asked. "I don't know yet," Ortensio replied. "But if I am, it started the day I cut that man's toast." That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, watching city lights flicker against the ceiling like shadows pacing just out of reach. Images looped through his head, Robert's hunched silhouette at the diner window, the grainy CIA file, that alley in Naples. A boy saving a man he didn't know was watching him back. A man who'd been guarding him ever since. He remembered something Robert said, maybe a year ago, over rye toast and cold coffee. Something casual. Or so it seemed. People don't just carry what they've done. They carry what they didn't do. That's the heavier bag. Back then, Ortensio thought he was talking about war. Now he wasn't so sure. By morning, the decision was made. He wouldn't wait. Whatever was in Geneva, secrets, cash, trap, or truth, he had to see it. because Strom hadn't just left him a fortune. He'd left him a mirror. And Ortensio, for the first time in his life, needed to see which version of himself was still staring back. Ortensio Milano stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the city burning beneath him in orange and steel. The rain from earlier had turned to mist, catching in the glow of passing headlights. He'd been standing there for over an hour, the unopened USB drive glinting from the counter behind him like a quiet dare. Every instinct he had, every sharpened reflex trained by a life of deceit and survival, told him to burn it, bury it, or send it into the ocean. But curiosity, the one habit he could never kill, finally dragged him back to the table. He slid the USB into the laptop. No encryption wall. No password prompt. Just a folder that blinked into existence with the sterile simplicity of bureaucracy. Lantern Archive. The name chilled him more than any threat could have. Robert's voice echoed in his head like a ghost from breakfast. Kindness is currency. Now cash in. Ortensio almost wished the files had stayed encrypted. The folder was a labyrinth. Inside were subfolders, personnel, surveillance, and field assets. He opened the first one and froze. The first file displayed a grainy black-and-white image of a boy, barely 12, his shirt torn, face dirty, eyes locked in defiance as he crouched protectively over a bleeding man in an alleyway. It was him, a child version of Ortensio Milano. The man on the ground, pale and drenched in blood, was unmistakably Robert Strom, though the tag beneath the image didn't say Strom at all. Subject: Agent R.J. Storm, CIA Field Architect. Status: Presumed deceased, Operation Lantern. Ortensio's jaw clenched. He scrolled down, eyes scanning the field notes. Extract failed. Compromised in Naples. Civilian interference prevented termination. He read that last line twice, then again, as if repetition might change its meaning. Civilian interference. That was him. That was the day everything began, and he hadn't even known it. He switched to the second folder, surveillance. It was worse. Photos of him through the years, at cafes, at clubs, beside limousines and graves. Some were candid, taken from rooftops. Others were closer, almost intimate, like someone had shadowed him through his entire life. The timestamps spanned decades. Robert had never stopped watching. The realization landed like a blade across his ribs. Every image told a story of distance, never involvement, never contact, just observation. His business meetings, his men, even his moments of solitude were documented with clinical precision. One photo stopped him cold. Robert sitting in his diner booth, hidden camera angle from above, Ortensio leaning forward mid-conversation. A red circle highlighted the coffee cup between them. A note beneath it read, "Trust achieved. Behavioral pattern consistent. Subject evolution, positive trajectory." Ortensio slammed the laptop shut. "You son of a," he stopped himself before the word finished forming. He stalked toward the window again, dragging a hand down his face. Was it gratitude or betrayal he was supposed to feel? The man had followed him across countries, infiltrated his peace, recorded his every unguarded moment. But for what? For protection? For data? Or for some experiment in human decency? Ortensio had built empires on loyalty, yet somehow it was the quiet old man with shaky hands who had outplayed him. He went back to the desk and reopened the folder. Beneath the photos was a short text file titled Field Report, Subject Milano. He clicked it, expecting more surveillance. Instead, a single paragraph appeared. He saved my life without knowing why. Watched his father die the same night. Became everything the world told him to be until the small mercies began. He doesn't believe in redemption, but he practices it daily. Keep him alive. He's proof we didn't fail. Ortensio read it 5 times. Then he poured another drink. The ice clinked like a metronome marking time toward a truth he didn't want to face. Was this Robert's legacy, a dossier meant to haunt him? Or a confession meant to free him? The lines blurred the longer he stared. Even the whiskey didn't burn anymore. In the last folder labeled Correspondence, there was a single audio file. Ortensio hesitated, then hit play. Robert's voice emerged, older and rougher than he remembered, but steady. "If you're hearing this, then I'm gone. And if you're opening what I left you, you've already seen how deep this runs. They'll come for it, Ortensio. You'll think it's about the files, but it's about you. Operation Lantern never died. It went dark. And you, kid, are its last loose end." The words struck like bullets. Ortensio sat perfectly still, feeling every nerve in his body scream to life. The air in the room thickened, electric, alive with something he hadn't felt since his first kill: danger. Robert wasn't just watching him. He'd been protecting him from someone else. From something bigger. The mention of Lantern wasn't nostalgia, it was a warning. He rewound the message and listened again, catching a detail he'd missed. "If you're smart, you'll destroy this. But if you're who I think you are, you won't. The files contain coordinates. Go to Geneva. Don't trust anyone, not even the ones who call you by your first name. Especially them." The message ended with static. Then silence. Then a single beep, like a recording that wanted to keep going but had run out of time. Ortensio leaned back in the chair, staring at the city lights through the reflection of the dark screen. Not even the ones who call you by your first name. That could mean a lot of people. It could mean everyone. His crew. His contacts. His informants. Maybe even his past self. He took a slow breath, grounding himself the only way he knew how, by imagining every possible betrayal in detail. The phone rang once. Then twice. Then again. Unknown number. He let it ring out, but it started again instantly, no delay, no pause. The sound cut through the penthouse like a pulse. Finally, he answered, voice low, controlled. "Milano." Static hissed for a moment, followed by a calm, deliberate voice. "Mr. Milano, I'm assuming you've accessed the Lantern files by now." Ortensio didn't reply. The voice continued, smooth, but carrying authority, the kind that came from a badge. "Agent Perez, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I've been waiting for your call, but it seems you beat me to it. So, let's save each other the courtesy dance." Ortensio smiled coldly. "I don't dance, Agent." Perez chuckled. "He gave you the files, didn't he?" The words sliced straight through the calm. Ortensio said nothing, but silence was its own confession. Perez exhaled audibly on the line. "Thought so. Listen carefully. Whatever you think you know about Robert Strom, or R.J. Storm, you don't. You've just inherited a very dangerous inheritance, and people on both sides of the law are going to want it." The way he said "both sides" made Ortensio's skin crawl. Perez continued, his tone firm but measured. "Those files connect every major syndicate leader to operations we weren't even supposed to know existed. The Palermo Protocol? It's not a myth. It's a failsafe. And if you opened it, well, congratulations, you're now the most valuable civilian asset in America." Ortensio laughed once, short and sharp. "Asset's not a word people use for me." "Then consider yourself a liability," Perez countered. "Either way, people will start dying around you if they haven't already. That old man didn't die of natural causes." Ortensio's expression hardened, jaw tightening like a loaded gun. "You're lying." "I wish I were." Perez's tone flattened. "We intercepted chatter, Langley, Brussels, Zurich. They called it a cleanup. His death was a signal, not a tragedy. The moment you opened that drive, they started the clock." Ortensio looked at the window again. The city lights blurred into streaks. "So, what do you want, Agent?" "To meet," Perez said simply. "And to make sure you live long enough to understand what he died protecting." The call ended abruptly, leaving Ortensio alone with the dim hum of the city and the steady pulse of uncertainty in his chest. He looked down at the USB drive, still plugged in, its faint light blinking like a heartbeat. Each pulse felt like a countdown. Somewhere between protection and manipulation, between guilt and legacy, Robert Strom had left him with something that might change everything or end it all. Ortensio closed the laptop, poured another drink, and whispered to the empty room, "You really didn't make this easy, old man." The amber in his glass caught the glow of the city as he lifted it in a silent toast. "But then again, neither did I." He drank deep, let the burn settle, and reached for his phone again. Whatever game he'd been dragged into, it was already too late to walk away. Outside, thunder rolled over the skyline, faint but growing louder, the kind of storm that never stayed confined to the clouds. And for the first time in a very long while, Ortensio Milano felt something more dangerous than fear. He felt curiosity sharpen into purpose. If you were in Ortensio's position, discovering that your mentor had been watching you for years, would you feel betrayed or protected? Tell me in the comments what you'd do next, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter of Ortensio's story. Ortensio met Agent Perez in the back of a shuttered butcher shop in Brooklyn's Red Hook. The place reeked of ammonia and iron, the kind of place that remembered blood even after it was scrubbed clean. Perez wore a gray coat, no tie, and a badge he didn't bother flashing, because this wasn't official. The agent leaned against the counter like he wasn't meeting one of the most dangerous men in the city. Ortensio didn't sit, didn't blink, didn't speak, not until Perez did first. "R.J. Storm," Perez said, tossing a folder onto the butcher block. "Not Robert Strom. That was just one of a dozen names. Real names been redacted in every agency file, but Storm, that's the one he kept when he vanished." Ortensio flipped the folder open. The first page showed a photo from the 1980s, a younger, leaner Robert in desert fatigues, smiling faintly beside a line of agents. CIA field clearance stamped in red. Status: deceased in action. "He died in Naples," Ortensio muttered, not looking up. Perez raised an eyebrow. "He was reported dead in Naples. That's not the same." Beneath the photo was a mission file stamped Operation Lantern, compromised. It read like fiction: embedded infiltration into Vescari cartel trafficking routes, a joint operation between MI6 and Langley. Only 5 agents knew the full scope. 4 of them didn't make it out. Perez pointed at a blurred photo pulled from Italian intelligence. He was the one they left behind. Shot twice. Somehow crawled out through a back alley and disappeared. Ortensio stared at the grainy image. "I know this alley," he said quietly, "because I was in it." He traced the outline of a boy in the background, barely visible. Shirt torn. Kneeling. "That's me." Perez nodded slowly. "He wrote that down too. Said a kid saved him from bleeding out before the Vescari could finish the job. Hid him in a cellar. Gave him food. Stitched him up with a needle and fishing line." Ortensio's jaw tightened. He had buried that memory so deep he thought it was a dream. But the dream had watched him back for years. The next page in the file was a personal memo, and signed but unmistakably Robert's voice. The boy was too smart. Too still. He didn't flinch at the blood. "Just asked if I was going to die. I lied. He didn't believe me." Ortensio felt his throat tighten. "Why didn't he ever tell me?" he asked. Perez replied, "Because you became something else." Something he needed to see play out. Perez pulled out a second folder, this one thicker, its tab labeled Milano Ortensio, Ethical Trajectory. It contained surveillance notes, annotated dossiers, and excerpts from intercepted conversations. The deeper Ortensio read, the more invasive it felt. But then he hit a page that stopped him cold. Raised under Don Marino Milano, subjected to cartel conditioning from age 9. Witnessed patricide. Protected agent. Removed from Naples by unknown intermediary, possibly Mossad asset under Storm's direction. Monitored development via untraceable proxies. Exhibited leadership at age 16. Tempered violence by 21. Deviated from Milano family norms, restructured hierarchy into internal loyalty network. Unconfirmed evidence of nonviolent conflict resolution increasing over time. Subject believes in control, not chaos. Ortensio closed the folder with a slow exhale. "He was grooming me." Perez shook his head. "He was hoping for you." Silence stretched between them. "He believed," the agent added, "that whatever the Milano name had done to you hadn't stuck as deep as everyone thought." It was absurd. Ortensio had ordered hits, burned informants, moved heroin through Istanbul in shipping crates, but Robert saw something else. Saw the kid with dirt on his knees and fire in his eyes. He saw potential, not poison. And he'd bet his life on it. Perez continued, when he resurfaced years later, he didn't reach out to the agency. He bought a fake ID, retired under a fake social security number, and moved here 5 blocks from your primary residence. That's not a coincidence. Ortensio didn't argue. He couldn't. He remembered the first time he saw Robert in the diner, how something in his gut said there's more to him. He thought it was paranoia. But it was memory. Half forgotten. Half dormant. Perez leaned forward now, voice quieter. Storm's wife died in '95. No kids. No next of kin. No home. Just files and a burner phone with exactly 2 numbers in it. One was a federal dead drop in D.C. He paused. The other? Yours. Ortensio blinked. I never got a call. Because he never used it. He said if he called you, it meant he'd failed. You had to find your way without the voice guiding you. For a moment, the butcher shop went still. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled down the street, metal clattering like bones. Inside, Ortensio sat with his hands clasped and jaw locked. Everything he had ever become, boss, kingmaker, tactician, had been watched from the shadows by a ghost who refused to intervene. Not because he didn't care, but because he did. Perez stood, adjusting his coat. There's something else. A name. The Palermo Protocol. You've seen it. Ortensio gave a shallow nod. It's more than blackmail. It's an architectural blueprint for dismantling cartels without a single bullet. Not by force, but by implosion. Perez's eyes darkened. Storm didn't just spy. He designed the method to end it all. They stared at each other, mobster and agent, mirrors of systems meant to kill or control one another. But now they were on the same side of a dead man's will. So what's your angle? Ortensio asked. Perez answered without flinching. I don't want to arrest you. I want to survive what's coming. And if Storm chose you, I'd rather be your ally than your obituary. Ortensio ran a hand through his hair. The weight of the past 3 days was catching up fast. The files, the photos, the memories, they were more than puzzle pieces. They were his biography written by someone else. A man named Storm who had waited until death to hand him the pen. Geneva, Ortensio muttered. There's more waiting. Perez nodded. Go. But know this. Once you open that vault, the world won't be the same. Not for you. Not for them. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. He never said it, but I think he loved you in his own messed up way. Like a father who got it wrong the first time and spent the rest of his life trying to rewrite it. Ortensio didn't respond. The door closed, and the butcher shop fell silent again. He sat there another 10 minutes. Just breathing. Just trying to stitch together the boy from Naples with the man in the mirror now. He thought about his father, the deals, the betrayals. The night he watched that same man try to trade his own son to a cartel in exchange for leverage. The memory used to rot him. Now it just explained him. Robert Strom hadn't been his savior. He'd been something worse and better. A mirror. A test. A ledger of everything Ortensio could have become, and everything he still might. Back at the penthouse, Ortensio opened a bottle of wine and played the audio file again, the one Robert left buried in the USB. This time, he listened differently. Not as a man being watched, but as a man being handed the last words of someone who never said enough. Redemption doesn't come for free. It's paid in pieces. Sometimes in blood. Sometimes in toast and coffee. Ortensio raised the glass to the ceiling like a toast. You old bastard, he said quietly. You never stopped playing the long game. He pulled out a worn leather satchel. Packed the USB, the files, the bank card. He didn't know what he would find in Geneva. But he finally understood why he had to go. Because Robert Strom hadn't just left him secrets. He'd left him a chance. Ortensio Milano hated flying commercial, but flying under a fake name meant swallowing a little discomfort. The seat on the private jet wasn't the problem, it was the silence. His lieutenant, Luca Bertoni, sat across from him, wearing a gray pea coat and the kind of smirk that said he didn't ask questions unless they came with a price tag. Luca was one of the few men Ortensio still trusted. Not because he was loyal, Ortensio had broken plenty of loyal men, but because Luca never pretended to be anything he wasn't. They touched down in Geneva just after dusk. A light drizzle kissed the tarmac, and the sky hung low like it knew secrets were being traded beneath it. Their car was waiting, charcoal gray Mercedes, windows tinted darker than morality. The driver didn't speak, just nodded and handed Ortensio an envelope with a keycard and coordinates. The destination wasn't a bank, but a private security vault tucked behind a nondescript bookstore in the financial district. Inside, the air was cold and tasted faintly of copper and concrete. A retinal scanner buzzed to life as Ortensio approached, and he slid the Swiss access card into the port. The vault door didn't just open, it unfolded, piece by piece, like the city's oldest secret was stretching its limbs for the first time in decades. Behind it sat a narrow corridor of safes, each with a small brass number. The one labeled 716 XK waited like a locked confession. Ortensio placed his palm on the sensor. The machine clicked, chirped, and released. The steel drawer slid out with a mechanical sigh. Inside, under a layer of dark velvet, sat three things: a metal case, a sealed envelope, and a stack of unmarked currency bands so thick they looked fake. Luca let out a low whistle. Well, he muttered, I guess the old man wasn't bluffing. Ortensio ignored the cash. He reached for the envelope first, cream paper, Robert's shaky handwriting across the front. You saved me. I watched you to see if that was a fluke. It wasn't. You're a bad man, Ortensio, but you are the best kind of bad. Now use this to burn the worst of us down. He stared at it for a long time, unsure if it was praise or condemnation. Maybe both. Maybe that was the point. Robert had known he'd come, known he'd open this, and known what it would turn him into. That wasn't a letter, it was a trigger. The metal case was locked with a combination. Ortensio keyed in Robert's badge number from the CIA files, 01493. It clicked open. Inside were rows of flash drives, cassette tapes, and printed dossiers. Each one labeled with a name Ortensio recognized and most he hated. But it wasn't just names. It was details. One folder, marked Mancini, Rotterdam file, included photos, offshore accounts, voice recordings from intercepted phone calls, and a transcript of a bribe paid to a Dutch port authority. Another, marked Torres, Mexico City branch, detailed heroin routes through agricultural shipments and a confession taped in a hotel room. These weren't just pieces of evidence. They were weapons. And Robert had been sitting on them like a coiled snake, waiting to hand them to the right strike. Luca flipped through another folder and let out a low laugh. You see this? This one's got Ricci's name all over it. And he's been mouthing off about how the throne's yours when you're ready. He shook his head. Guess he didn't know the old man already crowned you with receipts. Ortensio didn't smile. He was too deep into the next file, this one marked Milano, internal watch list. And at the back of it was a flash drive labeled classified, eyes only. He hesitated before inserting it into his laptop. The screen flickered, then opened on a single folder. Inside were videos, dozens of them. Secret meetings. Deals that Ortensio never authorized. Men he trusted having conversations they shouldn't have been able to afford. Luca looked over his shoulder. Those are our people, he said flatly. Or were. Ortensio sat back, every breath feeling heavier. Robert hadn't just given him dirt on rivals. He'd given him the blueprints to burn down his own rot from the inside out. It wasn't a test. It was a choice. Light the match or let the rot spread. Stay king or rebuild something different. He scrolled to the final folder. Inside was one more video untitled. He clicked it. Robert sat at a desk, hands clasped, voice calm. If you're watching this, then I'm gone. That's fine. I lived longer than anyone wanted me to, especially the men I buried with secrets. But you're still here. And you can either be the last domino in a crooked line or the first stone in something better. I don't want you to be clean. You're not built for that. But I want you to be deliberate. I want you to use the teeth they gave you to bite the ones who fed you poison. This isn't redemption, Ortensio. It's retribution with structure. You always hated sermons, so I'll keep it short. They think you're an accident. I think you're the reset. So go ahead. Burn the old world. I left you enough gasoline. The screen went black. Ortensio closed the laptop. The hum of the vault felt louder now. Like the silence had volume. Luca leaned against the wall. What now? He asked, his voice quieter than usual. Ortensio ran a hand over his face. Thought of the blood his father spilled. Thought of the nights Robert said nothing but still watched. Thought of how much legacy had been used as a leash. And how much he wanted to use it as a blade instead. "We don't go home," he said finally. "Not yet." Luca tilted his head. "Then where?" Ortensio looked down at the folder still in his hand. His own name stamped on it. Secrets about men he trusted with his life. "We go somewhere quiet," he said, "and we start making a list." The vault closed behind them like a tomb sealing up history. Outside, the drizzle had turned to snow, thin flakes whispering down like ash. Ortensio stood beneath it, the cold barely registering. He had come to Geneva for answers. He was leaving with instructions. As the car pulled away from the curb, he didn't look back. Not at the bookstore. Not at the city. Not at the face of the man who'd trusted him enough to die with a plan in place. Inside his coat pocket, he kept the final letter. Not for what it said, but because it was the only thing that reminded him that someone like him could still be chosen. And now he'd decide who deserved the same. If you were handed the power to dismantle your enemies, with no one stopping you, would you take the shot or walk away? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see what Ortensio does with the match in his hand. Ortensio Milano stepped back into the city like a man returning from the dead. Geneva had left a stain on his soul, too many secrets crammed into too small a space, all tied to a man who had died quietly but stirred storms posthumously. His mind hadn't stopped racing since the vault. He couldn't stop hearing Robert's final words, couldn't stop seeing those folders, those names, those truths that didn't ask permission to exist. Now, walking the skyline of his kingdom, Ortensio understood that nothing about his empire was untouched anymore. The penthouse felt colder than usual, though the heat was humming and the lights responded like they always did. He poured himself a drink with hands that didn't shake, not because he wasn't scared, but because fear had become familiar. Luca was downstairs reviewing the copies they'd made, drives encrypted, dossiers locked in a hidden compartment behind Ortensio's bar shelf. They'd spent the flight home analyzing the Palermo Protocol, the centerpiece of Robert's legacy and the apex of his ambition. Ortensio hadn't wanted to open it at first, as if the name alone could rewrite what he thought he knew about power. But curiosity was a knife that twisted deep, and once he let it in, the blade never stopped. The Palermo Protocol was more than just a document. It was a system, a contingency plan designed to collapse organized crime from the inside out without ever lifting a gun. It detailed decades of financial loopholes, offshore laundering webs, and pressure points inside international law enforcement. There were annotated maps of supply chains, judges with sealed indictments, and a list of shell corporations so interlinked that even seasoned accountants would choke on the data. At the center of it all, marked in red ink and all caps, was a name: Ortensio Milano, executor. He stared at it for an hour. Ortensio had spent his life building empires, not dismantling them. Every brick of his world had been placed through blood, betrayal, and an unspoken oath of survival. Yet here was a blueprint not just to burn it all down, but to control the collapse. It wasn't vengeance. It was precision revenge layered over redemption. Luca sat across from him now, laptop open, eyes tired. "Boss," he said, voice low, "if we push one button from this thing, Mancini loses his shipping contracts. Ricci's blackmail folder goes public. Even Cordero's offshore accounts get frozen." He closed the laptop gently, like they were defusing a bomb. "This isn't leverage. This is war." Ortensio didn't respond. He looked out at the city skyline like it was someone else's child, broken and flickering. "He left it all to me," he murmured. "Not the money. Not the files. The responsibility." Luca exhaled through his nose. "You gonna use it?" Ortensio didn't answer. That was the problem. He didn't know. He'd spent years surrounding himself with wolves, some loyal, some starving, all dangerous. If he turned the key on the Palermo Protocol, even his own crew would be vulnerable. Men who'd killed for him. Men who'd saved his life. Men who didn't know they were already compromised by a ghost named Storm. And Ortensio, was he their executioner now? The question chewed at him. Loyalty wasn't just currency in their world. It was religion. And Robert, the old spy with trembling hands and sharp eyes, had given him a heretic's gospel. Later that night, Ortensio sat alone in his safe house, a nondescript brownstone near the park that no one but Luca knew about. The air smelled of bourbon, old leather, and burnt memories. He played the last audio file on the USB, a short message labeled Palermo Addendum. Robert's voice crackled through the speakers. There's a difference between control and chaos. The mob thinks it lives in control, but it's addicted to chaos. What you've built, Ortensio, isn't an empire. It's a pressure cooker. I'm handing you the valve. Open it, or it explodes. Either way, someone bleeds. Ortensio stood to refill his glass, but didn't make it halfway to the bar. The explosion hit like a hammer from below. The shockwave launched him off his feet, glass shattering around him like angry stars. Smoke bled from the staircase as fire crawled up through the floorboards. The reinforced windows cracked but held. He landed hard against the edge of the couch, ears ringing, vision doubled. The smell of chemicals burned his nose. He'd been hit. Not directly. Not a car bomb. A breach. The explosion hadn't targeted the top floors. It was set low, maybe in the garage or sub-basement. It was meant to flush him out. Or warn him. Luca's voice came through his comm's earpiece, distorted and sharp. "Boss, you okay?" Ortensio coughed once, tasted smoke, and rasped, still breathing. Then added, "The files, did you move them?" Luca answered, "They're already off-site. Double encrypted. They won't get them." Ortensio exhaled, half relief, half rage. Whoever it was, they knew. They knew he'd seen the protocol. Knew he hadn't destroyed it. Knew he was considering using it. And that meant someone was watching more closely than he thought. Sirens wailed faint in the distance. Ortensio grabbed his backup gun from the kitchen drawer and slipped down the emergency staircase, his ribs bruised and blood in his mouth. He moved like muscle memory was driving, not thought. Outside, rain hissed down again, Geneva to New York. It followed him like guilt. Luca pulled up in a stolen sedan, eyes scanning every window. "Safe house is gone," he said. Ortensio nodded grimly. "So's our cover." Luca clenched the wheel. "Someone inside?" Ortensio's silence was answer enough. He had trusted too many. Built too much. Let the rot in without checking the foundation. The protocol hadn't created paranoia, it had justified it. Robert had called it a pressure cooker. Now the seal had cracked. They drove for hours with no destination, just motion. Ortensio sat in the passenger seat with the Palermo folder on his lap. His father used to say the only thing worse than being hunted was being the hunter who forgot he was prey. Ortensio finally understood what that meant. Robert's words returned, loud in his head. This isn't redemption. It's retribution with structure. And Ortensio realized he didn't want to be redeemed. But he damn well wanted structure. And now, someone else wanted to burn it before he could use it. Ortensio Milano knew betrayal when it walked into a room. It didn't announce itself. It didn't scream or shoot. It smiled, poured a drink, and asked how your day was going. That's why, when Marco Tesoro walked into the warehouse on 3rd and Lexington with his usual cocky grin and a fresh haircut, Ortensio already knew. Marco had been with him since the Istanbul run, back when Ortensio was still earning his crown with blood and precision. He handled foreign accounts, ran logistics through South American ports, and knew every safe house location by memory. That made him valuable and dangerous. The Palermo Protocol had flagged a pattern weeks ago: financial anomalies, bounced offshore transfers, and a call to an unknown London number at 3:07 a.m. Now, cross-checked with names in Robert's Geneva files, Caligo Holdings appeared. Caligo was no ordinary competitor. It was a shell, a ghost corporation tied to arms deals, data smuggling, and high-level political blackmail across 5 continents. Robert had been tracking them before his disappearance. The files in the vault named them as the syndicate poised to replace the old world by wiping out the surviving heads of it, including Ortensio. And Tesoro, the trusted second-in-command, was their knife planted deep in the ribs. Ortensio didn't act immediately. He waited. Watched. fed Marco small bits of false data, locations, meeting times, even fabricated intel about the protocol's core structure. Each lie came back to him, boomerang style, through backdoor surveillance Perez's team had quietly set up on his behalf. There was no denying it anymore. Marco had flipped. 3 days after the safehouse explosion, Ortensio cornered Marco at a rooftop restaurant in Midtown. The skyline burned red around them, sun dipping low like a secret. Ortensio wore black. No tie. His gun was tucked behind his belt, but he wouldn't need it. Marco arrived late, classic Tesoro, and slid into the booth across from him like it was just another Tuesday. "I don't like what I'm hearing," Ortensio said, eyes never leaving the horizon. Marco blinked, still playing dumb. "About what?" Ortensio didn't answer. He just slid a photograph across the table, Marco talking to a man in a tan coat outside the Caligo Shell office in Zurich. The silence was immediate and loud. Marco's smirk twitched. "You've been busy," he said softly. Ortensio nodded once. "So have you." Another pause. The air between them crackled like wire about to snap. "You think this is betrayal?" Marco finally said. "No. This is evolution. You're clinging to dying rituals. Oh, Storm knew it. Caligo knows it. The future's cleaner, faster, smarter. You could have been part of it." Ortensio leaned forward, voice ice. "Storm built that protocol to destroy syndicates like Caligo. He didn't groom me to hand them the keys. He groomed me to bury them." Marco's eyes narrowed. "And you think you'll win this war with USB sticks and nostalgia?" Ortensio stood slowly. "No," he said. "But I'll win it without you." He walked out before the shot came because he knew it would. Caligo would see the meeting as a liability. Marco wouldn't survive the hour. That was the thing about betrayal. The moment it's exposed, it starts to rot from both ends. Luca picked Ortensio up 2 blocks away. "Clean?" he asked. Ortensio nodded. "Cleaner than he'll be by morning." The car peeled off into traffic, leaving the rooftop and its secrets behind. The war had officially started. Within 48 hours, Ortensio moved. He tapped into Robert's files and froze 6 offshore accounts tied to Caligo's ghost companies. That alone disrupted nearly $40 million in transit. Next, he leaked a falsified memo from Caligo's internal communications network suggesting Ricci had flipped a lie, but a potent one. Within hours, Ricci's crew turned paranoid, and 2 lieutenants vanished without trace. Implosion through implication. That was Storm's tactic. Ortensio was learning fast. He called in old debts from Singapore, Croatia, and Dubai, quiet allies who owed him favors, now weaponized into whispers and misinformation. One by one, rival power players began to question their allegiances. The old families weren't loyal. They were afraid. And Ortensio didn't need loyalty anymore. He needed fear sharp enough to slice through Caligo's operations like piano wire. Meanwhile, Agent Perez called again. Ortensio let it ring 5 times before answering. "I'm not in the mood for sermons." Perez didn't bother posturing. "You lost a lieutenant. You froze 10 assets. You've made your move. Now they're making theirs." Ortensio sighed. "What do you want?" Perez's voice dropped an octave. "I want the full vault. Every file. Every protocol entry. You're fighting shadows, Milano, and we're the only ones with light." Ortensio laughed, low and bitter. "You're 2 decades late. I'm not your asset." He paused. "I'm your reckoning." Perez went quiet for a beat. Then said, "Then don't come begging when your streets run red." Ortensio hung up. Luca, sitting across from him at the table, raised an eyebrow. "Feds pushing again?" Ortensio nodded. "They want the vault. They think it'll save them." Luca leaned back. "Will it?" Ortensio poured a drink. "No, but it might save us." That night, Ortensio met with his inner circle, those not compromised, not flagged, not yet seduced by Caligo's promises. He laid it all out. The files. The protocol. The hit on the safe house. And Marco's betrayal. Some men flinched. Others nodded grimly. But none walked out. "This isn't about territory anymore," Ortensio told them. "It's about infection. We let this thing spread. We're all dead, just slowly. Storm left us the cure. I'm just deciding who to inject first." He paused. Starting with the ones who think I'm still just a name in a headline. Across the city, screens lit up in boardrooms and basements, surveillance footage of Caligo meetings, leaked audio implicating mid-level bankers, and forged memos suggesting infighting among Caligo's leadership. It was all psychological warfare. And it worked. The following week, two of Caligo's partners pulled out of a weapons deal in Ankara. Another shifted funding away from their Milan operation. The walls were cracking. But Ortensio knew it wasn't over. Caligo wasn't just global. It was ideological. It wasn't a family, it was a virus. And the Judas knife in his side still hadn't been pulled completely. Because if Marco had gotten that close, someone else had to be closer. Ortensio stared at his reflection in the hotel mirror that night, eyes tired, jaw clenched. Robert's voice played again in his head. You always hated sermons. So I left you a war. He turned out the light. The night was silent. But the next kill was already on its way. Ortensio Milano didn't like cemeteries. They were too quiet, too orderly, graves lined up like unfinished business, wearing polished headstones. But this one was different. Nestled on the edge of an old Jesuit property north of the city, the plot was unmarked, modest, and intentionally overlooked. The only thing that identified it was the fedora Ortensio now held in his hands. He knelt in the soft grass, the morning fog curling around his black coat like something alive. There was no marble, no inscription, just soil still unsettled from the burial. Ortensio placed the hat on top, careful, as if it were fragile, and rested his palm on the mound for a breath. You didn't even leave your name, he muttered. Just your burden. The wind answered with silence. He stayed there a while, not saying much at first. Just thinking. About Naples. About the alley. About the man who walked into his diner every morning like a shadow and left a war in his wake. Then, finally, his voice cracked the stillness. I didn't deserve this, he said. But I'll make it mean something. It wasn't a vow. It was a confession. Ortensio stood slowly, brushing mud from his knee. In his coat pocket was a flash drive, one of the ones marked Caligo Primary. The Palermo Protocol had enough dirt to bury cities. But today, he wasn't burying. He was unearthing. He met Agent Perez that afternoon in an abandoned terminal at JFK, the same one Storm used decades ago as a black site exchange point. Perez wore a Kevlar vest under his blazer. Ortensio wore a look that said he didn't trust anyone, least of all the government. He handed the flash drive over without ceremony. You get one taste, he said. That's all. Perez raised an eyebrow. This is enough to blow up 6 countries' worth of deals. Then blow them, Ortensio replied. But don't expect dessert. You keeping the rest? Perez asked. Ortensio shrugged. Insurance. Perez gave a slight nod, almost respect. Any names in here I should be worried about? Ortensio's tone didn't change. All of them. Within 48 hours, FBI-led task forces swept through warehouses, corporate fronts, and shell addresses connected to Caligo Holdings. Geneva, Miami, Marseille, Hong Kong. Dozens of mid- and high-level operatives disappeared into federal custody. Assets were frozen. Shipping routes collapsed. The syndicate bled from the inside out. Ortensio watched it all unfold from a safe house in Queens, bourbon in hand, Luca beside him on the couch. Think they'll come for us? Luca asked. No, Ortensio said, eyes on the screen. They'll come for each other. We just pointed the knife. That night, he called a meeting at an old factory he once used for smuggling Turkish bonds. This time, it wasn't for smuggling, it was for judgment. Only his most trusted lieutenants were invited. Or what remained of them. The ones who didn't sell him out. The ones who hadn't died. He stood in front of them under a single flickering light. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just spoke. We're done with the old way, he said. The blood debts. The silence for silence trades. The corruption that keeps us feeding off our own. He looked at each face. If you stay, we change. We turn legit. Foundations. Shields. Not swords. If that's a problem, walk. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the oldest capos, a man who once pulled Ortensio from a firestorm in Palermo, stood and walked out. 2 more followed. Luca didn't move. "You sure?" he asked, voice even. Ortensio nodded. "I'm done bleeding for ghosts." The men who remained didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just stayed. And that was enough. The next morning, Ortensio returned to the diner. It had been closed for renovations since Robert's death. The bell above the door still chimed, rusty and offbeat. He walked past booth 6 and sat in the far corner, facing the window. The same waitress who used to serve them, older now, grayer, placed a coffee in front of him without asking. "Thought you forgot us," she said. Ortensio looked at the steam rising from the cup. Never. He placed a photo on the table, Robert, years ago, in Naples, half smiling in a torn coat. And next to it, he left a single folded napkin with a note. "He came here to die. I came here to learn how to live." The fedora stayed on the grave. But the war it started? It was still writing its ending. Could you walk away from power if it meant gaining back your soul? Drop your answer in the comments, and subscribe to see what Ortensio builds now that he's burned the old world behind him. The first rehab center opened on a gray Tuesday morning without fanfare or speeches. No ribbon cutting. No photographers. Just a small metal plaque near the entrance. The Strom Foundation. For those who want out. Ortensio stood across the street in a black coat, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. Luca stood beside him, arms crossed, squinting at the modest brick building. "Not what I pictured," he said. Ortensio's gaze didn't leave the front door. "It's not for us." The Palermo Protocol had been many things: a weapon, a map, a judgment. But Ortensio had reshaped it into something else, a catalyst. He liquidated the nonviolent assets first, pouring millions into rehab programs, job placement for ex-cons, and scholarships tied to neighborhoods his crew once owned through fear. No logos. No glory. Just quiet infrastructure rebuilding the very streets they had once helped break. The legal fund came next. Free defense attorneys for teenagers picked up for their first charges, especially those orphaned by gang wars and cartel crossfire. Robert's vault money paid for it all. The irony wasn't lost on Ortensio. An empire built on silence was now financing a system built on second chances. Not all his men agreed, but enough stayed. He dissolved 3 shell companies, sold off 2 properties in Monaco, and placed the rest into blind trusts. The Strom Foundation became the face of the future, while Ortensio faded to shadow, silent, strategic, and untraceable. He even fired 2 federal judges who had once owed him everything. One tried to threaten him. The other begged. Ortensio gave neither the satisfaction of a response. In the underworld, his silence became gospel. But peace never lasts in a city made of scars. The photograph leaked on a Thursday, tucked in the back column of a fringe political blog. The image was grainy, slightly off focus, Robert Strom and Ortensio Milano sitting across from each other at the diner, toast between them, coffee cups in hand. The headline was casual, almost mocking. "The Boss and the Ghost. Who really was Robert Strom?" By Friday, the image had gone viral. Conspiracy theorists, former agents, media sharks, all tearing into it like vultures at a fresh kill. Within 48 hours, major outlets ran deep dives. Was Strom really CIA? Was Ortensio his project? Was the entire criminal justice system manipulated by 2 men who met over breakfast? The myth of the untouchable mob boss began to shift. Now he was a man with a past. A story. A motive. And stories, Ortensio knew, were more dangerous than bullets. Luca slammed the newspaper down on the table, jaw tight. "We have to respond." "No," Ortensio said. "They're rewriting you in real time." "I don't care." Luca stared at him. "You should." Ortensio didn't answer. But he did feel the pressure curling in around the edges. Former enemies, emboldened by his public silence, began to stir. A minor cartel in Bogotá reopened old routes. A disgraced capo in Naples resurfaced, whispering that Ortensio had gone soft. Even Caligo Holdings, though fractured, released a vague statement denying any connection to Strom and framing Ortensio as a delusional vigilante. The shadows were returning. And with them, the old hunger. One night, Ortensio sat alone in the old diner. Booth 6 remained untouched, preserved exactly as Robert had left it. The waitress brought him coffee and said nothing. The city buzzed outside, restless. He opened the worn leather folder containing the last fragments of the protocol, entries not yet triggered, names not yet burned. Inside were two final operations. One targeted Caligo's silent financiers, the faceless bankers who kept blood flowing through digital veins. The other? An underground media network built to dismantle narratives just as ruthlessly as he once dismantled crews. Ortensio looked at the files, then out the window. Legacy or empire? That was the question. Could he walk away and let the truth rot in the mouths of liars? Or did he scorch the narrative before it twisted into something unrecognizable? The next morning, 3 media servers in Prague, Belize, and Qatar went dark. Caligo's communications faltered. Their funding stalled. And one by one, Ortensio's old rivals went silent. He didn't call it vengeance. He called it editing. Still, the whispers followed him. People wondered aloud in newspapers, podcasts, courtrooms, was Ortensio Milano reformed? Or just more dangerous? The Strom Foundation's rise only made the question sharper. Some hailed him as a man rewriting fate. Others warned that no one who had built an empire of fear could ever truly leave it behind. Ortensio didn't answer them. He just kept building. By month's end, 3 more centers opened. 100 at-risk youth were in full scholarships. 15 ex-gang members were placed in government jobs. The streets got quieter. Not perfect, but less afraid. Luca found him on the foundation rooftop one night, overlooking the city. "You ever miss it?" Luca asked. Ortensio sipped his coffee, eyes scanning the skyline. "Every damn day." Then he set the cup down. "But missing it doesn't mean I want it back." The wind picked up. And the city kept breathing. The bell above the diner door rang with its familiar tired chime, the kind that didn't announce a king or a killer, just another morning. It was 7 a.m. sharp. The city was still wiping sleep from its eyes, streetlights fading into the gray-blue promise of daylight. Inside, the air smelled of burnt toast, too old coffee, and history. Ortensio Milano stepped through the door, no entourage, no bulletproof shadow trailing behind him. He wasn't wearing a suit today. No tie, no gold chain, no watch that said power. Just dark jeans, a plain black coat, and in his hands, Robert Strom's fedora. The hat looked smaller now, lighter. As if it, too, had been emptied of its ghosts. The regulars barely looked up. They'd seen him before, though never like this. Not quiet. Not soft. Not finished. He walked past booth 6, still preserved, still sacred, and slid into the seat across from it. The waitress came over, same one as always, hair pinned up and eyes sharp from decades of caffeine and grief. She looked at him, then at the fedora, and something softened in her expression. "Toast and jam?" she asked, already knowing. Ortensio nodded once. "Just like always." She walked off without another word. Behind her, the television in the corner mumbled headlines over the clatter of forks and the low hum of life. Major organized crime networks dismantled this month in coordinated international raids. Strom Foundation opens 3 new youth centers in the Bronx, Flatbush, and East Harlem. Federal sources say the anonymous whistleblower responsible for the leaks remains unidentified. Ortensio sipped his coffee. It was bitter. Cheap. Perfect. He placed the fedora on the seat across from him, angled gently toward the window. The light caught the rim just enough to make it look like someone might still be sitting there. A ghost in gray wool and 1,000 secrets. Ortensio didn't speak to it, didn't whisper anything profound. He just let the silence settle between them like it used to. The toast came cut diagonally, jam on the side, butter already melting. He ate slowly, like the morning had nowhere else to be. No deal to chase. No blood to spill. Just a booth, a memory, and a plate of toast. When he finished, he pushed the plate aside and reached into his coat. He pulled out a sealed envelope, thick with paper and weight. No logo. No address. Just a line, handwritten in black ink. To the next man who thinks he can't change. He placed it gently under the fedora. adjusted it once, like he was straightening a legacy. Then stood. The waitress came back with the check, but he was already laying down cash, no credit card, no name, just bills and a tip that could pay her rent twice over. "Take a week off," he said. She blinked. He smiled faintly. He would have wanted that. Outside, the city was brighter now. The sun cutting through glass and grime like it had something to prove. Ortensio stepped into it, no longer ducking cameras or corners. No headlines followed him. No sirens waited. He didn't look back at the diner. Didn't need to. He had left the only thing behind that mattered. Not money. Not maps. But permission. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.